What's up everybody, Coach Mills here, and in Valorant, ultimates are one of the most impactful things that you can use in every single one of your games, but a lot of players are consistently using their ultimates wrong and getting next to no value, which over the course of many games in a row is just gonna charge you loss after loss, and then you're gonna D-rank and it's gonna be really sad, and you're gonna go cry to your mom. She's not gonna understand because she doesn't play Valorant. You know how it is. Anyways, let's talk about the top 6 ultimates that you use incorrectly so that you could have more impact on average in your games and win more games. It's simple as that. But before we get started, if you want a fat record of like 11-0 tomorrow, then you gotta smash that like and subscribe button, because we're gonna give you the magic touch and it's just gonna be impossible for you to miss a shot. So do yourself a favor and smash the like and subscribe. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Now, kicking it off with the first character we're going to talk about, and this is the ultimate that is probably used incorrectly a large majority of the time. Even you yourself is probably using it incorrectly in your games, and it's Phoenix's Run It Back. Now, I'm sure you've seen this before. You either see a Phoenix run in with his ult and it dies instantly. You see a Phoenix run in and somehow he dies, and then he dies again when they push where you started the ultimate. Or he runs in, gets ice walled, gets slowed, and he gets no value, just does nothing with his ultimate. So here are the big mistakes that happen when you're playing Phoenix and you use Run It Back. The first thing is you do it too close. You gotta make sure that you're a safe distance away. If enemies can kill you and you're too close to them, they're just gonna chase after you. And even worse, if enemies see you go into your ultimate, let's say like you're trying to fight someone in the middle of a point, if they see you go into your ultimate, they can play keep away with you. They could just like dodge you a little bit. They don't even have to take the engagement into you. And then the second your ultimate wears off, they can pursue where you started the ultimate. They can kill you. You got to make sure that you have a good distance away from the enemy. And it's also pretty important that you either have people with you or you know generally where enemies are. You never want someone to sneak up on your actual ulted body and just let you like basically kill you. So definitely not too close to the enemy. Now, the next thing that people do for some reason on Phoenix is they don't bait utility. You still have to bait utility if you want a Phoenix ult. If you try to go into the enemy and you just start off the game, you're like, hey, I'm gonna clear with Phoenix ult. You activate your Phoenix ult, you run in, you're gonna get slowed, you're gonna get ice walled, maybe you get naded, whatever happens. You do not want to be trading your ultimate for just a couple of abilities. You want to be getting raw value, and it's worth so much more than that. If you bait out utility first, they're not gonna have this utility to actually deal with your character copy with the Run It Back. So they actually physically have to duel you, which is exactly what you want. You're gonna be confident, you're gonna be going in aggressively. So make sure that you bait out substantial amount of utility before you use Phoenix's Run It Back, or you use it on enemies later in the game when they already exhausted a lot of those utility-based stalling abilities. Now, moving on to the next thing is players need to be using utility when you're using Run It Back. You need to be still setting up as if you were running in just like you would be any other time. That means use flashes. That means flush people out of corners even with your flame. These type of things are still going to be really good when you're running it back. You have quite a bit of time to work with. You don't just want to rush in and not use any of your abilities. It still has a purpose. And this is going into the last thing with Run It Back. At its core, Run It Back is to gain site control. You see, Phoenix's job as a duelist, as an initiator, is to really clear the site and gain site control. Either killing enemies on site, making contact with them, or clearing it off. And Run It Back allows you to do that. So you really want to be using your utility in the exact same way that you would be if you're going onto point, just doing it very rapidly. Flash a corner, throw your fire into another corner, swing, clear the site, get the information, clear it out, and then your team can go in behind you onto a cleared site. But at the very least, even if you died or even afterwards, you're gonna go back to your original body. So whatever happens, you will come out of this situation net positive. Now we go to the next character and ultimate that you're using incorrectly, and it's Sage's Resurrect. Have you ever been like, just having a terrible day and you're like 5-15 because you don't smash our like and subscribe buttons, and it's just like making it so you lose all your games, and then all of a sudden your Sage reses you only to die again, and you're like, what the heck, now I'm 5-16. Well, if that's your buddy, then send him this video, because I'm gonna tell him how to make sure that that doesn't happen. The first thing, and the most important thing, is you should be investing abilities if you're not sure the place that you're resurrecting is safe. Sure, if you know for a fact that no one is near you, like it's a 1v1 and the enemy is literally planting on the other side of the map, just res, you're fine. But if you're nearby any enemy at all, it's really good to invest a wall, invest slows, and of course hold the angle as well. and it is definitely worth investing your time and a little bit of abilities to ensure that the res goes off and the enemy doesn't make a play on you, not only killing your res target, but you as well. It's definitely worth it. So don't be afraid to combine or connect Sage Wall Slow with your Resurrect as well. Now, the next thing is there are two big scenarios when you should be using Sage Wall. The first one is a tempo res, and this is the one that is like really powerful for just rezzing someone. You're doing it on the fly, you're about to go in, someone's down, you know the enemy's on point or whatever, you're trying to clear it, you just res someone and then you go in. It's just a tempo res. It's just to build that numbers advantage and spiral your momentum. Maybe all of a sudden it's like a 2v3 and then y'all get a kill and it's a 2v2, and then all of a sudden you res someone and now it's a 3v2, and then you just go in, it's a tempo res. The other res is selective. And what I mean by that is if we get in that situation we talked about before where it's a 1v1 but someone's across the map, you have the option of who to res. And you might be asking, okay, who do I res? Well, it depends on a couple of things. Who has abilities, who has ultimates, and that's really what you should be thinking about. If you know that the enemy is like across the map and you're not gonna die, and you have an option between a few of your allies, right? You should pick like, hey, who has an ability, who has ultimate? Just look at that thing, make that analysis. But of course, if you have someone that you're talking to in Discord, that's probably gonna be the best person to res, because that's gonna be the one you have the most communication with. But in general, it should be based on those factors in game. So that's just something to think about. Now, the last big mistake we gotta talk about with Resurrect is assuming that the round is won without it. And this is really often people do this where they're like 3-2 and they're like, hey, we won this round, it's in the bag. But it's not in the bag. That's a round that you have barely an advantage in, especially if the enemy is holding the position, you have to push into them. Maybe you're pushing onto site and you have to defuse and it's 2v3. Honestly, just invest the Resurrect, especially if you lose this round, it's gonna cost you eco. It's gonna cost you so much down the line. It's not worth more than a Resurrect, I guarantee it. And if you res, you're almost assured to win the round, which guarantees you the money, guarantees you double ult charge plus the defuse. Why would you not just invest your res in that scenario? Don't be stingy with your res, just invest it, win more games. Now moving on to the next ultimate that you're probably using incorrectly, and it's Killjoy's Lockdown. Now the biggest lockdown mistake is actually not placing it in an area that will contest the most amount of power angles. Now we talked about power angles a lot of time on this channel, just angles that have a really powerful pivot point onto the point to contest it, to swing, things like that. You want to contest the maximum amount of these when you put your lock down, because then it's a lot easier for you to kind of surmise where the enemies are, because they're going to go to some other power angle. They're not going to just be standing in the middle of the point. That's not what they're going to be doing. Even if there's like a little hole somewhere on the middle of the point in the middle of nowhere, I promise you that's not where they're going to be hiding at. So the more power angles you cover with your ultimate, the harder it is for enemies to actually position well post ultimate, which is exactly what you want. The second thing is, do not place it where it gets wall banged. And you might be saying, okay, this is pretty obvious. Well, it might be, but some people don't really understand what's wall bangable and what's not. In some cases, you put it up in heaven, it can still get shot. Every single enemy is going to know exactly where it is. It has to be someplace where enemies physically have to route through you and your team to get to it. It can't just be somewhere that is hidden by natural cover or anything like that, because especially if an enemy has an LMG or even an op, they can shoot that through walls, so many different walls in the game. So really be cognizant of that. Don't get your Killjoy ultimate destroyed by just one pesky opper. That is just the biggest mistake. That's a really simple one to fix though. Now the next big mistake is just assuming enemies will instantly run away. A lot of enemies, especially if you watch higher level play, just go watch some streams of someone like Wardell, Sinatra, or anybody, they will use the time of the Killjoy ult as a resource. They will actually still engage in the Killjoy ult until like a couple of seconds past it, and a lot of time they will get some kills in the Killjoy ult and then they will retreat. And the reason that they do this is because Killjoys throw their ult down, they think, hey, this area is secure, I'm gonna push in, but it's really not secure if enemies hold their ground. And if enemies are holding their ground against you and you assume that they just ran away like scurry little rats and they didn't, you're just gonna get shut down because you're like, hey, this area is clear, but it's not clear. It's not clear until your Killjoy ultimate goes off. And I'm not saying wait until then, I'm just saying as it ramps up, then it's less likely that they're there. At the very beginning, it is immensely likely that they might be just holding their ground, waiting for you to swing out. Now moving on to the next ultimate that people are using incorrectly, man. It's Sova's Hunter's Fury. And there's a lot of different ways to use Hunter's Fury, and I don't think that there's one perfect way. Even pros are using it in a lot of different ways. But let's talk about some things that you can do in your games to just get more value with it on average. Everyone wants that, right? So the first thing that you should be doing is using it prematurely when you know an information ability is going to go off. Like, let's say your Cypher is using his ultimate. Right when he uses it, that is the moment that you activate it, like right before it goes off. So then the second you see someone, you're already ready to fire at them. You don't have to like react to it because the enemy's already going to be moving the second their location is revealed. The next thing you could do is throw a recon rollout, and you know that that's going to tag someone on point, and then you pop your ultimate before the recon tags anybody. You're already pre-firing likely angles, and if enemies are there, you just start firing at them right away, as simple as that, and they really can't avoid it if they're already tagged. Now, the second thing, and this is kind of a strange one, but I see Sinatra do this a lot in his games, his pro matches, is he will use it off of a hunch, and not really a hunch, more like an educated guess. And he will do either things like enemies have not routed this way, or maybe he hears someone really far away, or he thinks that enemies are routing this way just by information that his team has gathered across the map, and he will use his ultimate as almost like a clearing method, almost like an information gathering method, where he shoots it long ways and he just tries to check entire lanes, like all of A long, all of default. He checks that entire section with his ultimate. And you might be asking, okay, well, what if he gets no one? Well, he knows that enemies aren't there. That's the first thing, which is information gathered, which is still pretty good. And the second thing, if he tags people, I've seen him multiple times, even in a pro match, where he tagged like 2 people, ended up getting 2 kills out of his ultimate that was completely blind with pretty much no information before. Not in the traditional sense, but it was still an educated guess, and that's something you could do in your games. If you have a strong suspicion that enemies are routing there, make it so you know. Actually, use this ultimate so that you know. If you think that they're coming and you think, hey, a lot of people are coming here, use your ultimate, find out for your team, and if you like tag 3 people, they know, your team know that they're there, plus you did all this damage. It is a really good use of this ultimate, and it doesn't have to be always used in one singular way. Now, of course, the best thing that you could do with Hunter's Fury pretty much across the board is use it to contest spike. This is a pretty obvious one because it's so easy, but you should really be doing this. Just distance yourself from the spike, make sure you can't die, in the same way that you would be using an orbital strike. Very, very good use of Hunter's Fury, of course, but the biggest mistake I think that happens a lot is people will use Hunter's Fury too close to enemies. This happens a lot, even at the higher levels, where a jet will just come and push up and kill you because you're using your Hunter's Fury too close. You gotta make sure that you're distancing yourself. Hunter's Fury has a huge range. Make sure that you're not really close to enemies, because if enemies are nearby, it's really hard to hit them, first off. And second off, they're gonna know exactly where you are. They're gonna push you. They're gonna punish you. And the second Hunter's Fury is over, make sure you reposition, especially if enemies are nearby you at all. Now, moving on to the next ultimate we gotta talk about. We have to talk about Cyphers Neuro Theft. And this is the thing about Cyphers Neuro Theft that a lot of people get wrong. Yes, when you activate it, you get information about the entire enemy team, but if you just start rushing around, then enemies also get information about you. A lot of times, what pros would do when they use Neuro Theft is they will still be sneaky. They'll use Neuro Theft, they will start to slow walk route. They'll take that information right away. They'll make a game plan by looking at the minimap. You should always check the minimap. They'll look where enemies are. They will understand that those enemies are likely to relocate, because that's kind of what this ultimate really makes them do. It really makes them want to relocate. But at the same time, they're not just running. Unless there's like an open site, of course they're just going to dash. But most of the time, they're taking that information. They know generally where enemies are, and then they set up in locations to cut off their rotation. A lot of times, let's say they Cypher ult, right? And most of the enemy is on A point and they're near C. They will send one person to go plant C, and then they'll send multiple people to set up at power angles that cut off rotation from A. These players are set up in really powerful positions, and they know roughly where the enemies are. The enemies can't check every single corner because they're on a time crunch, and it's going to be a lot easier for these people sitting up in these power positions to punish them. So that's just one example of what you can do with Cyphers Neuro Theft. It's not just about, hey, I know where they are, let's just go rush at them. Hey, I know where they are, let's just go rush the point. There are more layers to this ultimate, and it's one of the most powerful ultimates in the game. The only downside of this ultimate is you gotta get that first pick off, but in a ranked game, that is actually not that hard at all. It matters a lot more in pro play because pros like guard each other's bodies and things like that. We're not gonna talk about that right now, but I think you get the picture. Neuro Theft is very, very underrated, and if you can master it, you're gonna get a lot of value for you and your team. Now, moving on to the last ultimate we gotta talk about, and this one, I'm sure, especially for you in low elo, I'm sure that you know that this ultimate is used wrong so much, and it's Omens Ult from the shadows. Now, the thing about Omen's ult is 9 times out of 10, someone teleports back into your spawn, you go, you seek them out, you kill them. That's just all the, I mean, you basically get a pick off the enemy's ult, right? That is like the dream scenario if you're up against an Omen. But, I mean, as you get better, Omens aren't going to do this. As you get higher, Omens aren't going to do this. But there's still ways that you should be using your ultimate to get more value. So the first thing is you need to be using your ultimate differently depending on its goal. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you're using this ultimate to gain info, then you should be like teleporting in the middle of the point, in the middle of a vantage point, trying to gather as much info as possible. Now, if you're using this to make a plant play, then of course you should be hiding yourself in cover, planting right away, and something like that, and you should be doing it when you're safe. Now, problems can arise when people, for no reason, try to split the difference. And what do I mean by that is, let's say they want to get information on a site, and they might want to plant on a site, so they kind of teleport to default, they look around, they see no one, they actually commit to the teleport, but an enemy is just hiding, peeks out, kills them. Well, the thing that they really messed up on here is that they teleported in a way that didn't give them full information of the site. This is because they kind of wanted to split the difference, but it really worked against them. And that's the thing about this ultimate. It is really generally going to be better to use it for one or the other. Now, I'm not saying you can never use it for like that mix in between, but there's a great deal of risk attached to that. The more you try to make it fit multi-use, like maybe I'll flank with this, maybe I'll gather their information with this, maybe I'll plant with this, yeah, you're not going to set yourself up in the right way to have the maximum amount of value because, like I said, if you teleport right in the open, you're going to have the most amount of information, but that's not the best type of teleport if you're trying to plant, because if you're trying to plant, you want to try to stick it, you want to be behind natural cover, so it's really different depending on the situation, and that's the important point I'm trying to make here. How you teleport really depends on your goal, and you should try to make a goal before you teleport, not make a teleport and then make a goal after the fact. If your goal is getting information, get information. If your goal is planting, try to plant. You get the picture. Now, the next big mistake about Omens from the Shadows is they use it far too early. First off, Omens from the Shadows is going to be better with less people on the battlefield. So like in a 2v2, it's going to be a lot better than in a 5v5 because there's less players that they can give up angles for to go check where you are, no matter where you're teleporting. And two, it's also about pressure. And that's another big problem with Omen's ult. You should be using it, especially if you're using it for an aggressive play. Like you want to flank somewhere, you want to make an aggressive play. You need to be using it when the enemy is under pressure. Not when your team is playing default, not when your team is just waiting in spawn trying to get a pick off. When your team is actively pushing it onto a site, making plays, being proactive, that is when you teleport, because then it actually costs enemies something. It costs enemies something when they come back and try to look for you. Like if you go into their spawn when your team aren't pushing in, what does it cost them? Nothing. They could just go back as like 3 people. They can go flush you out, get a kill, and then they can go back to the team fight, right? But if your team is actively pushing in and 2 of their teammates are in a fight right now, what does it actually cost them to go look for you? Well, you might not even be there. They could waste their time. They're leaving their teammates out to dry. There's a lot that it's costing them. And that is a big part about using this ultimate for the most amount of value. Now, the last tip I'm going to give you about this ultimate is play on enemies' perceptions to get the most amount of value. This is kind of slimy in a way because the audio in Valorant, I mean, it's really awful if I'm being honest, but you could do something like smoke up in heaven and ult down in hell. Now, what enemies are going to hear a lot of times is, oh, there's a smoke, I hear the ultimate, he's probably in heaven. But you're not in heaven, you're in hell. But the thing is, it's really hard to differentiate levels actually with the audio for a lot of people. That could just be a way that you play on people's perceptions. You do something that people think is going to happen, but of course you mix it up with the ultimate. That is what people love about Omen, the crafty nature of him. But I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something. If you have a buddy that you play with, definitely send this to him so that he can start getting more value out of his ultimates instead of just, you know, teleporting into the enemy spawn and dying, or, you know, Killjoy ulting and just running out and dying and getting his Killjoy ult destroyed. Whatever the case may be, go send it to your buddy. But if you enjoyed the video, smash that like and subscribe. Thank you so much for coming by. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. And if you have any tips for any of these ultimates or any other ultimate in the game, definitely let us know in the comments down below so we can learn from your valuable insight as a GameLeap community member. Anyways, that's all I got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time,